I didn't know a single moment could bend the entire shape of your life. Until the night I saw him standing in the doorway of his farmhouse, lit by nothing but moonlight and a truth I wasn't ready to face. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch my videos, but don't subscribe. It truly means the world when you do. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. So please take a second to subscribe, and don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. It reminds me that stories really do connect us, no matter where we are. If stories like this make you rethink the softness of the heart, if they remind you how easily trust can shift under your feet, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. These stories are pieces of my past, and sharing them helps me breathe through the parts I once tried to bury. The bus let out a shuddering sigh as I stepped onto the red earth, and the smell of soil and smoke hit me like a memory I hadn't realized I carried. I had left my life behind, thinking a few weeks in Africa would be a refuge from the quiet implosions I'd been ignoring for years. But the moment I set foot on this land, I understood that escape is a lie you tell yourself when the pain is already in your blood. Every grain of dust clung to my skin, a reminder that nothing washes off the past, and that even here, far from home, I would carry it with me. The sun hovered low, brushing the horizon with bruised shades of purple and gold, and I realized I was staring at more than a landscape. I was staring at a world that felt alive in a way my city never had. The heat pressed against my shoulders like it wanted to sink into my bones, but it wasn't oppressive. It was revealing. It was patient, the way the earth itself seemed to wait for me to notice it, to meet it halfway. And then I saw him. He wasn't standing in the center of attention, didn't call out or wave. He was just there, leaning against a weathered pickup, arms folded, eyes on the horizon. There was a steadiness in him that made the air around me shiver. I remember thinking that quiet people are dangerous, not because of what they do, but because of how little you can read until it's too late. He noticed me eventually, a tilt of his head, a small nod, like he had been waiting to see if I was worth noticing. "I'm Elias," he said, his voice low and calm, as if he had no need to fill the silence. There was no charm, no show, it was simply him, and somehow that made it more unsettling than any calculated smile I had ever encountered. I told him my name, my voice catching against my throat, and I realized I had been holding my breath since the moment I stepped off the bus. The drive to the volunteer site was quiet, and I let it be. I didn't need words. I watched the land roll past, fields patched with green and brown, children running barefoot across the dust, dogs chasing them lazily in the heat. Every mile, the city inside my head slowed down. The arguments, the fights, the suffocating silence I left behind, they all seemed to fade under the clarity of this open sky. But there was a heaviness too, an unspoken warning. That freedom is never free, and that some truths find you even when you are trying to disappear. By nightfall, I was exhausted, but sleep eluded me. I walked the narrow paths between the clay houses, listening to the chorus of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. And then I saw him again, standing under the faint glow of a lantern, watching the world as if he had been given a map I could not read. When our eyes met, I felt a flicker inside me I couldn't name, something like recognition, but sharper, more unsettling. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the small path leading to my temporary lodging, and I followed. Inside, I unpacked slowly, touching each article of clothing as if it might tell me a story I had forgotten. I heard his footsteps outside, soft against the packed earth, and my chest tightened. There was a rhythm to the night that I had never noticed before, the wind whispering through the trees, the hum of distant animals, the slow, steady presence of someone who could see right through me. I wasn't sure if it frightened me or comforted me. Maybe it did both. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the moonlight spilling through the window, thinking that everything was about to change. I didn't know how yet, or why, or what part of me he would touch that would leave me trembling for days. But in that moment, I understood something I hadn't been ready to admit. I had been running, yes, but not from life. I had been running from myself. And here, in the middle of nowhere, in a place that felt untouched by my mistakes, I was about to confront the parts of me I had been trying to bury. By the time sleep finally came, it wasn't the exhaustion of travel that claimed me. It was the weight of anticipation, the pull of something I hadn't dared hope for. I didn't know it yet, but the dust that followed me from city streets to this quiet land had found its companion in the stillness of a man whose eyes seemed to know all the cracks in my armor. And I realized that the story I thought I had left behind was only beginning to unfold, with shadows I hadn't expected and truths I wasn't ready to face. The days passed slowly, like sunlight dribbling over cracked walls, lingering longer than it should, refusing to leave. I found myself drawn into a rhythm I hadn't known existed, waking to the scent of earth after rain, feeling my fingers leave tiny imprints in soft soil, listening to the wind as it carried stories from distant hills. And always there was him, Elias, present without demanding it, quiet without explanation, patient without judgment. His silence became a language I could almost understand, though it frightened me how much I wanted to. I started noticing the small things first, the way he tilted his head when he listened, as if the world spoke only when you were willing to pay attention, the way his hands moved, slow and deliberate, when tending the fields, the faint crease of worry around his eyes, like he carried invisible burdens I wasn't meant to see. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from seeing them. I couldn't stop myself from wondering if, somewhere in that quiet exterior, there was a world I could belong to, a place where my chest didn't ache with absence. There was one evening that I can't erase. The sky had bruised again, heavy clouds rolling in from the west, and the first distant rumbles of thunder shook the air. I had been walking along the edge of the field, my thoughts tangled like the weeds I pulled from the soil, when I realized he was there behind me, not a step closer, not a word spoken, just watching. The space between us felt alive, charged with something I couldn't name, something dangerous and magnetic all at once. I wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 things, but my voice had left me. He finally broke the silence with a question, soft and careful. "Are you running or are you looking?" And it hit me harder than any slap or scream could have. I didn't answer at first, because the truth was messy, jagged, and I wasn't sure I could admit it to myself, let alone him. But the way he waited, steady as the earth beneath our feet, demanded honesty. Slowly, I whispered words I had been avoiding, about leaving, about the emptiness I carried, about wanting to disappear and not knowing where to go. He didn't tell me to stop or to hold back. He just nodded, like he understood every unspoken thing I had never said aloud. And in that nod, I felt a shift, a weight lifting, a part of me I had buried for years stirring awake. There was safety in it, terrifying as it was, because safety often comes disguised as temptation, as possibility, as the pull of something you know you might regret. I wanted to linger there forever, in the quiet and the understanding, but the storm rolled closer, and the first drops of rain began to fall. We ran for shelter, laughing when the water drenched our hair and clothes, and in that laughter was a kind of permission I hadn't allowed myself in years. The rain stripped away the dust, the sweat, the heat, the invisible layers I had been carrying, until it was just me, just him, just the pulse of the world around us. I wanted to reach out, to close the space between us, but every instinct told me to wait, to let the silence do its work. And it did, curling around us, binding us in a quiet intimacy I could neither name nor resist. Inside the small hut, the air smelled of wood smoke and earth, a comfort I hadn't realized I craved. We sat close, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off one another, but far enough to respect the invisible line we hadn't crossed. I wanted to touch him, to understand him through skin, to map every corner of this presence that had started to feel like home. But I stayed still, and that restraint spoke more than words ever could. In his eyes, I saw my own reflection, vulnerable, yearning, teetering on the edge of things I wasn't ready to admit aloud. The night pressed against the walls like it wanted to listen, and I realized I hadn't felt anything like this in years. Not fear, not longing, not the trembling thrill of someone who understands you without asking. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet tension hummed, a warning I couldn't name. It whispered that proximity breeds desire, and desire bends the line between right and wrong until it's almost unrecognizable. I felt it stir, a subtle ache behind my ribs, and I hated myself for welcoming it, even as it made my chest feel impossibly alive. By the time the storm passed, the world was washed clean, but inside me nothing had stopped shifting. I felt exposed, raw, trembling with emotions I hadn't earned. And when I finally closed my eyes that night, the echo of his presence lingered in every breath, every heartbeat, every thought. I was tethered to him already, though I didn't know the rules of the tie or if it would save me or destroy me. And in the silence, I realized some truths don't need words. Some connections can't be rationalized. Some storms leave marks that last far longer than the rain. I had entered his world as a stranger, a fugitive from my own life, and I was beginning to understand that I might never leave as the same person. The days that followed carried a tension that was almost unbearable, as if the world had conspired to blur every line I thought I had drawn so carefully. Each morning, I woke to the golden light spilling across the red earth, and each night, I lay awake, tracing the memory of him in my mind like a delicate scar. I had always believed that control was safety, that restraint protected me from heartbreak, from mistakes I could never undo. But here, in the quiet hum of the fields and the rhythm of his steady presence, I realized how fragile all of that was. Fragile and useless against what had begun to grow between us. He didn't seduce with words or gestures. He never forced attention. But his presence pressed against my chest like a tide, filling the spaces I had hidden even from myself. I noticed the subtle brush of his hand against mine when passing tools, the way his gaze lingered on me just long enough to make my breath catch, the tiny smile he reserved for moments when the sun struck him in a certain way. I told myself these things were innocent, coincidences, tricks of a mind desperate for connection. But deep down, I knew better. Every glance, every silence, every heartbeat spent near him chipped away at the walls I had built for years. One afternoon, I found myself working late in the field, the sun a harsh glare above, sweat slicking my skin. He came to check on me, carrying water in his hands, and in that quiet gesture, the simple, deliberate offering, I realized I was already addicted to him. I wanted to tell him to confess, but the words twisted and refused to leave my throat. Instead, I took the water, hands brushing, and felt the spark of electricity coil between us, unspoken and undeniable. And just like that, the line between friendship and something more became a blurred, dangerous shadow. We started meeting in the quiet corners of the farm, claiming work as an excuse, lingering just a moment longer than necessary, our conversations carrying a weight that neither of us named. There was laughter, yes, but also the slow, simmering tension that only grows when two people dance around something they can't admit. I could see it in his eyes, an equal mix of caution and surrender, and it terrified me more than I had imagined fear could reach. Every inch of space between us became electric, charged with potential, and every time I tried to step back, my chest betrayed me, aching for proximity I couldn't allow. One evening, the sky had turned a bruised indigo, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses like a secret no one else could hear. We sat on the edge of the field, side by side, shoulders brushing lightly. I could feel the warmth radiating off him, each heartbeat syncing with my own in a rhythm I wasn't prepared for. The air was thick with unsaid words, and my pulse pounded so loudly I thought he would hear it. I wanted to speak, to confess that I had been craving this connection for days, for weeks, for months I hadn't admitted existed. But fear clenched my stomach, and I stayed silent, letting the quiet stretch between us until it became unbearable. Then, without warning, he turned to me, face inches from mine, eyes searching, questioning, daring. And in that split second, every rule I had lived by crumbled. I felt the pull of something I had been denying, a desire so intense it made my stomach twist and my hands tremble. My chest burned with the need to reach out, to bridge the final gap, to cross the line we had both been skirting for so long. And when I finally did, when our fingers brushed and lingered, the world seemed to tilt on its axis, leaving me dizzy with both wonder and guilt. I should have stopped. I knew I should have, because everything inside me screamed caution. But there was no turning back once the first line is crossed. Each touch after that was a confession, every glance a silent promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I realized in those moments that love, or whatever this was never clean or easy. It demanded risk, demanded surrender, demanded that I face the consequences of desire unrestrained. By nightfall, we were sitting beneath the stars, breaths mingling, hearts beating in dangerous harmony. I knew that what we had begun could never remain hidden for long, and yet I wanted to stay in that moment forever, suspended between fear and longing, between right and wrong, between the life I had and the one I could only dream of. And as sleep finally claimed me, I understood a truth I had been avoiding. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Some desires, once felt, cannot be denied. And some connections will haunt you, quietly, relentlessly, for the rest of your life. The mornings were quiet, but nothing felt untouched anymore. Even the sun seemed sharper, its light unforgiving against the truth I could no longer avoid. What had begun as gentle curiosity had become something heavier, more insistent, a force that had pulled me across lines I never intended to cross. And now, in the aftermath, I was left staring at the fragments of what we had built, scattered like dust across the floor, wondering if the pieces would ever fit back together. He was still there, calm, steady, but I could see it in his eyes, the weight of choices, the silent tally of what we had done and what we had lost. I wanted to speak, to explain, to justify, but words had grown useless. Silence carried more truth than any confession, and we both knew it. Every glance between us was heavy with unspoken understanding, that what we had shared could not exist in the same world as the life we had tried to maintain. The intensity of what had bloomed between us had been beautiful and dangerous, intoxicating and cruel. And now, it demanded reckoning. The village around us carried on as if nothing had shifted, children chasing one another, smoke rising from distant kitchens, wind sweeping across the fields. But we moved through it differently, like ghosts, each step echoing with the weight of knowledge we could never take back. I realized that intimacy, once forged in secret, leaves permanent marks. No amount of distance, no amount of pretending, could erase the way it changes you. And every time I looked at him, I saw not just the man who had opened my heart, but the man who had shown me my own capacity for desire, for weakness, for hope. There were moments when laughter returned, fragile and fleeting, but it was always tinged with caution, with the awareness that joy and pain were now inseparable. We spoke of mundane things, whether crops, village happenings, but each sentence carried an undercurrent of tension, the remnants of what had been and what could never be again. I felt like I was learning him, and yet unlearning myself at the same time. The self I had brought into that land, the one running from fear and past mistakes, had been irreversibly altered. And then, one evening, it happened. A simple, ordinary moment. I looked at him as he prepared dinner over a flickering flame, and something in my chest broke and rebuilt itself at the same time. I realized I had loved him, not cautiously, not in whispers, but fully, completely, in a way that terrified me because I could not protect it, could not contain it, could not own it. I understood that love, when it comes like this, is a force that does not negotiate. It does not wait for consent or caution. It arrives, unannounced, and demands to be felt, whether you are ready or not. But with love comes consequence. With desire comes reckoning. The life I had hoped to reclaim, the stability I had sought, was no longer mine to inhabit untouched. Every relationship I had paused, every trust I had built elsewhere, was now shaded with the weight of what had passed between us. And yet, paradoxically, I felt alive in ways I had long forgotten, aware of each heartbeat, each breath, each small miracle of presence in a world that was otherwise indifferent. I don't know what will become of us. Perhaps the story will end with distance, with unspoken longing and memories that burn quietly in the corners of our minds. Perhaps it will endure, but transformed, forever tethered to a time when the lines blurred and the heart led where reason feared to follow. I only know that I am changed. I know that the dust I carried from home has mixed with the red earth here, and that nothing can separate the two. And in that mixture, I find a strange sort of grace. A reminder that even in mistakes, even in betrayal to oneself, there is a kind of beauty in being truly alive. By the time the stars blinked awake over the horizon, I understood something that had eluded me until now. Love is never clean, never convenient, never easy. It is a force that will push and pull, that will shape you and expose you, that will leave scars that both hurt and heal. And perhaps that is the lesson I was meant to learn in the quiet of this land, under the watchful gaze of a man who showed me both my vulnerability and my courage. I lay awake that night, the wind carrying the scent of wet earth through the window, and I realized that endings are illusions. Every choice, every touch, every glance lingers, like echoes of a storm you cannot outrun. And in the silence that followed, I knew that we would never forget, that the dust that had followed me here would always carry his presence, and that, despite everything, I would never regret the lines we crossed.